Anime Vanguards Update 4 is by far one of the most successful updates the game has ever had. Maybe aside from the JJK update or the game's release, it used to peak around 15k players post JJK update, but now the game is doing insane. And whether this is because of a competitor's lack of innovation, whether this is because changes the devs have made, or even the new devs, we'll be going over all of this in today's video and kind of what led to the game's second success and their growth. So without further ado, let's just jump straight into it and start discussing how the game got here. For starters, let's talk about what this update actually was. This was a Bleach update after all, and I do want to get it out of the way that when tower defense games do Bleach updates, they usually do pretty well. That's a given. I won't glaze or try to pretend that's not the case, but I will say, considering Anime Adventures is out right now, and really just the other competitors that Anime Vanguards has, they have so many more players compared to these other games by such a large margin, you really start to wonder what they're doing that players are a lot happier with. Personally, I think it's a lack of innovation and new content from these games, considering Anime Vanguards has always prided themselves on quality of life, new features, really just going the extra mile even if they didn't have a ton of content, and it seems like that paid off in the long run, because now a lot of these games don't have that, and it seems like some of them are kind of scrambling to get to that point, but it's not something that you can rush. You have to remember that Anime Vanguard did release in the summer of last year, so it's had a good 7 to 8 months or so to cook and really just get here, and now you have games that haven't been fully investing or pouring into their quality of life that are now sort of scrambling to try and push everything out as quick as they can, and for number one, that's really the main problem. I mean, you can't fully rush some quality of life. It's something you have to slowly and steadily incorporate with your updates, and a lot of these games just weren't doing that. A good example is Anime Adventures. Anime Adventures had a whole year or so to cook. I mean, the game was taken down for a really long time, and it released a buggy mess. There weren't certain unit models. There was just a whole lot of stuff the community was disappointed with. It was just a really big mess compared to Anime Vanguards, but the game still had more players just because it re-released. Now when you start to see the different ways that Anime Vanguards innovated compared to games like Anime Adventures, you start to see why players in the long run now prefer the game. I personally think that other tower defense games tried a little too hard to be like Anime Adventures, and all the ways that Anime Vanguards has tried to be different really did pay off in the long run. I mean, you have games like Anime Last Stand, who at launch did have about 100k players, but now in the long run they only have about 20k average maybe, which isn't bad for a tower defense game, but it's definitely not 100k like they had. So you really start to think, okay, what can these games do differently? And on top of all this, the sheer amount of content in this update really did contribute to the player count. Obviously, I can go on and on about which game is better optimization, which game is more innovative, but overall, I think the fact a Bleach update delivered so highly is really what pushed Anime Vanguards, and now in the long run, might do better than Anime Adventures. You know, you have both games and they have similar units, they have similar updates. You know, each game has already done a Bleach update now, they both have Dragon Ball characters, they have this and that. But ultimately, what game gives a better experience on top of those characters is more important. I think Anime Vanguards having so much quality of life does help, but at the same time, their art style, their models, even the way that they make their updates is a lot different from Anime Adventures, and it's something that people have been waiting for. The way that they aren't trying to push raids and legend stages and story as much as Anime Adventures did, because even the devs themselves said that all three of those aren't too different from each other. I mean, they're really just the same thing with a different coat of paint, and they keep trying to find new ways to incorporate certain series in a way that isn't too repetitive, and I think that's really important. The developers have also put focus on making the unit's passives innovative, new, and really something fresh that creates new gameplay or affects the gameplay in a new way. The devs themselves said in a recent stage that when making units, they start with the passives first. What this means is that they can then create more unique passives that aren't really bound by the unit's stats themselves, as the stats come second. This is really important, one, just for accuracy, and two, for creative freedom and creative liberty. I know that's a lot, so really just the TLDR is that making the passive first gives them more creative freedom, helps balance the characters better, and lets them do more unique things with the units compared to if they did it the other way around. If you take a look at characters like Ichigo and how he sort of deals with stocks with his passive, or even how his other passive lets him interact with other characters of certain series, previously there were some characters like Ishtar or even Gilgamesh who they have a passive that relates to fate units. I know Gilgamesh has a passive where if it's characters that aren't Ishtar or Saber, I think, or maybe one more, I'm not sure, if you place units other than those around him, and himself, of course, but if you place units other than himself, or the ones I just listed, by him, he loses damage, because they're not those units. But if you were to place Ichigo by Gilgamesh, he's technically counted under that category of units. So basically, he can interact with any buffers that have special conditions, any DPS with special conditions. He really works well with anybody, which is really interesting, because previously units that were like that really relied on the units they were bound by their passive. If you're running Gilgamesh, you either want him to be Monarch or you want to run a full dedicated Fate team, whereas now with Ichigo that changes. He also deals with health stocks, which is something newer that tower defense games don't usually do. Tower defense games normally have a set amount of HP for your base, rather than a certain amount of stocks or like health bars, I guess you could say, that you have, and Ichigo actually gets buffs and benefits from losing stocks. And Aizen does too, but Ichigo's ability lets him take away a stock, so he can essentially self-buff himself in that way. It's something new not only with stocks, but the fact he can buff himself in this way that we haven't really seen from anime Vanguards or other games. And so now the developers can set up future units that maybe give a health stock back, maybe something like a poisoned or a fake health stock that if consumed takes 2 health stocks, things like that, that'll just make Ichigo better. It lets his gameplay now feel innovative, new, and a bit challenging compared to other units, while also setting him up for future success. Things like this are really what's going to take this update and make it one that people think about for a long time. You have these units that are not only future-proof, but are already expanding on the new ways that they do content. So if you have new content and then they're finding new ways to expand on that already new content, they're basically set up for success. I think we saw a lot of this with boss rushes, for example. Not many tower defense games do something like a boss rush. A lot of the times it's just a raid. Now, on paper, they are technically the same. You have one big boss that you have to fight, and you might get some sort of unit, or maybe materials, or whatever the case may be. But the fact that boss rushes rotate out so frequently, and they give you units, they give you essential materials, they become such an integral part of the gameplay, and they are more boss-focused. It's not necessarily that you do 20 or 30 waves and then there's a big boss after. It's that a lot of the times the bosses and mini-bosses are incorporated earlier on, and they have new mechanics, and that's really important. The devs pour a lot of time and effort not only into quality of life, but the actual tower defense aspect of the game, and I think that's something other competitors have been lacking. When you look at other, whether it be on-site or off-site, so off Roblox or on Roblox tower defense games, they have new mechanics and things that you don't see often, but people really like. I think the lack of innovation in this way, and the focus more so on the gacha aspect, and really just, you need to pull for this character, there's a chance you get this character from completing this, you need this character to be able to beat this, to get this character, and it really just becomes a really big gacha mess, where everything is based off a percentage, and it's all just gacha, it's all just chance at the end of the day. But anime Vanguards tends to put a bit more into the actual tower defense aspect, and the ways that you can create teams, the actual unit passives themselves, all of it is innovative and new, and really just fresh, and feels more like other tower defense games off-site, in my opinion. It really pours into the actual player experience and what you can actually get out of an update that makes you want to play the game over competitors. For example, you can take a Saber Alter team, right? And there's a new Bleach character, I'm not sure his name, but he can essentially turn debuffs into buffs. And now if you didn't know, Saber Alter buffs essentially all units in her range or a certain amount of her range. She debuffs them by some damage and range, I think, maybe even cooldown, and he's able to take those debuffs and turn them into buffs. So instead of having your team struggle a little bit and you're now doing less damage, honestly, you now have a whole unit that can benefit from those buffs and works better with her. You also have units like Yamamoto, who has synergy with one of the Winter Update units I've heard. You have units like Sung Jin Woo and Igris, who have had synergy with each other since the start of the game, and how they directly sort of benefit from each other as units. Stuff like that that really focuses more on the actual units themselves, aside from a simple buff, are really important. I think competitors oftentimes might have something where if you have these 2 units, they get a buff. If you have these 3 units, they do an extra attack, something like that. But actually having layered gameplay that really benefits from pairing units together is really important. You could do a summon comp or honestly a boss killer comp, because Igris is good for bosses and Sung Jin Woo is too with his summons. You can now pair those with other characters, whether it be buffers or other boss killers, and they're going to work better together. Overall, the gameplay itself leans a lot more towards actual offsite tower defense games and really focuses on the tower defense aspect rather than just making a shiny, cute unit that does damage. It also helps that the new units this update really encourage teamwork. Both the rifts and the new Valentine's portals essentially need other people. You need teamwork, you need these new creative team comps and passives to actually win. You have to not only rely on your own creativity that the devs sort of give you the freedom to have, but also the creativity in the unit passives and in the actual game modes themselves to progress. It's not just as simple as you join a match, you play, you win, and that's it. You need other people, you need to know what you're doing, you need good team comps, you need to know what you're doing and sort of how to rely on those passives and use them properly. And I think tower defense games sort of stressing that the players need to know what they're doing and actually focusing on the tower defense aspect is something a lot of other games don't have either. Sometimes it's just place a unit that does a lot of damage and that's it. Overall, let me know what your thoughts on this update are and the ways that you think this update has done better than their competitors. I think there's a lot of other stuff I didn't mention, but these were the main points. Really just the way the content, the quality of life, the new units, all of it sort of innovates, and they're even taking new content that they themselves sort of introduced and again innovating off of that. If you liked this video, or you liked my breakdown of this update, or the things that I thought sort of gave this update its big boost and really got it to where it is, then as always, you can like, comment, subscribe, even share the video, but really just let me know what you think boosted this update and got it to where it is.